If I had waited 5 more seconds, I would have never met him. The rain hammered against the pavement like it was trying to erase the city, each drop bouncing off the sidewalk in sharp bursts as I pulled my coat tighter around my son, his small body pressed against my chest, his breathing uneven from the cold and the fear I hadn't yet put into words. Midnight in Manhattan always felt different when you had nowhere safe to go, and tonight every passing car looked like a decision I couldn't afford to get wrong. My phone battery had died 3 blocks back. The streetlight above me flickered, and when the black SUV rolled up beside the curb, I didn't hesitate. I just opened the door and climbed in, whispering the first address that came to mind like it could still save me, but the moment the door shut, something felt off. The silence was too heavy, too controlled, and when I looked up, my breath caught in my throat, because there was no driver, only him, sitting beside me, one hand resting calmly on his knee, the other adjusting the cuff of a suit that probably cost more than my rent for a year. His dark eyes met mine like he had been expecting me, like this wasn't an accident at all, and before I could speak, the locks clicked shut with a sound that echoed louder than the storm outside. I froze, my son stirred in my arms, his tiny fingers gripping my sweater, and I felt my pulse spike in my ears. "I think you're in the wrong car," I managed, my voice barely steady. But he didn't react, didn't even blink, just looked at me like he was measuring something I couldn't see. Then he spoke, his voice low, controlled, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be obeyed. "No," he said, glancing toward the rain-streaked window as headlights appeared behind us, "too close, too deliberate, you're exactly where you need to be." My stomach dropped. I turned to look back and saw another vehicle slowing to match us, its presence too intentional to be coincidence. My fingers tightened around my son as panic crept in. "Stop the car," I said. Sharper this time, "I need to get out," but he didn't move, didn't argue, just leaned slightly forward and tapped the glass separating us from the front, and suddenly the SUV began to move, smooth and controlled, like this had already been decided long before I stepped inside. "You don't understand," I whispered, shaking my head, "I just need to go home." And that's when he looked back at me fully, his expression unreadable, something dark and protective flickering beneath the surface. "Home," he repeated quietly, almost like the word didn't belong in his world. Then his gaze shifted to my son, taking in the way I held him, the way I tried to shield him from everything I didn't understand, and for a split second, something in his face softened, just enough to confuse me, just enough to make me hesitate, before the moment passed and his voice returned to steel. "Step out of this car," he said, calm but absolute, "and whatever is following you won't give you a second chance." I stopped breathing, the words settling into something heavier than fear, something real, something final, and as the rain blurred the city into streaks of light outside the window, I realized this wasn't about getting into the wrong taxi. This was about stepping into a life I had no way out of. And the man beside me, the one who looked like he owned every shadow we passed, leaned back into his seat and said the words that would change everything. "For now, you stay with me." The car did not speed up, but it did not slow down either. It moved like it already knew where it was going, smooth and controlled, as if the city outside had no say in it. And I sat there gripping my son tighter, feeling every second stretch longer than it should, my mind racing through every bad decision that had led me here. "Who are you?" I asked finally, my voice quieter now, not because I was calm but because something in me understood that raising it would not change anything. He did not answer right away, his gaze stayed forward, watching the blurred reflections of streetlights sliding across the glass. Then he spoke, "Someone who does not make mistakes twice." The words landed heavy, not loud but absolute, and I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. "Then this is a mistake," I said, forcing the words out. "I am not part of whatever this is." He turned his head slightly, just enough for his eyes to meet mine again, and there was something different in them now, something sharper, more focused, like I had just confirmed something for him. "You were seen," he said simply. "That is all it takes." My stomach twisted, I shook my head. "Seen where?" "I have been at work all night. I picked up my son from my neighbor. I was just trying to get home." My voice cracked on the last word and I hated it, hated how small it sounded, but he did not react to that either. He only leaned back slightly, one hand resting along the edge of the seat as the car turned onto a quieter street, the city noise fading into something distant. 3 blocks ago," he said, "you walked past a building you should not have noticed. You looked up, you hesitated, and someone else noticed that." I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the rain. I tried to remember, the sidewalk, the flickering light, the way I had glanced up without thinking, just 1 second, that was all it took. That does not make any sense, I whispered, more to myself than to him, but he heard it anyway. It does not need to, he replied, it only needs to be enough. My son shifted in my arms, letting out a soft sound that pulled my focus back. I brushed his hair gently, trying to calm him, trying to calm myself, and for a moment the man beside me watched that, really watched it, like he was seeing something unfamiliar. Then his jaw tightened slightly, almost imperceptible, and he reached forward again, pressing a button I had not noticed before. The temperature inside the car warmed, the air softer now. He is cold, he said, not asking, just stating it. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change. He will be fine, I said quickly, defensive. Without meaning to be, but he did not argue, did not push, he simply nodded once and looked away again, and somehow that felt more unsettling than anything else. The car slowed as iron gates appeared ahead, tall, silent, opening before we even stopped, and my heart started pounding again, louder this time, heavier, because whatever this was, wherever he was taking me, it was not temporary. It was not a misunderstanding that could be explained and fixed. It was something else entirely, something that had already decided I belonged inside it. And as we passed through the gates and the world outside disappeared behind us, I realized I had stopped asking to leave, not because I trusted him, but because a part of me had started to believe what he said might be true, that stepping out now would not take me home, it would only take me somewhere worse. And without looking at me, as if he could hear that thought forming, he said quietly, you are still breathing because you chose the wrong car. And for the first time, I did not know if that was a warning or a promise. The car came to a complete stop, but no one rushed to open the door, no one spoke, and that silence pressed in harder than anything that had happened so far, like the night itself was holding its breath waiting for him to move first. I did not reach for the handle, I did not even shift, I just sat there with my son curled against me, listening to his steady breathing and trying to match it, trying to stay calm in a place that felt anything but. Then the door beside him opened from the outside, and a man in a dark suit stepped back without saying a word, not looking at me, not even acknowledging that I existed, and somehow that made it worse, because it meant this was normal to them. Whatever this was, it was routine. He stepped out first, the rain barely touching him as if it knew better, and for a second I considered staying exactly where I was, refusing to move, refusing to follow, but then he turned slightly, not fully, just enough for his voice to reach me. If you stay in the car, you become a problem, he said calmly. If you step out, you remain under my protection. The choice was not a choice, I knew that now, so I tightened my hold on my son and stepped out into the cold night air, my shoes hitting the ground that felt too clean, too quiet, nothing like the streets I had come from. The gates behind us had already closed, sealing off the world I understood, and ahead of me stood a house that did not feel like a home. It felt like a place where decisions were made that could not be undone, lights glowing through tall windows, shadows moving behind them in a way that made my chest tighten. He walked forward without looking back, and I followed because there was nowhere else to go. Inside, the warmth hit immediately, soft lighting, polished floors, everything precise, controlled, and silent. Even the people who appeared moved like they had practiced every step, every glance. One of them approached, older, composed. Sir, he said quietly, and handed him something small, a phone maybe. I could not see clearly, but I saw the shift in his expression, not fear, not concern, just calculation. They are still searching, the man added, his voice low enough that it should not have reached me, but it did, and the words settled deep, confirming what I had tried not to believe, that this was real, that someone out there was looking for me. And I had no idea why. He nodded once, dismissing the man without another word, then his attention returned to me, fully this time, and for a moment it felt like everything else in the room disappeared. You will stay here tonight, he said, not asking, not offering, just stating it like it had already been decided. I opened my mouth to argue, to say something, anything, but the words did not come, because I did not know what to argue against. I did not know what was waiting for me outside those gates, and he seemed to understand that hesitation without me saying it. In the morning, he continued, his tone softer but no less firm, you can decide if you still want to leave. My grip tightened slightly around my son. And if I do? I asked quietly, forcing myself to meet his gaze. He held it for a second longer than necessary, then looked away, as if the answer did not need to be spoken out loud. Then you walk out those doors, he said, and I will not stop you. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten, not because it sounded freeing, but because it sounded final, like once that choice was made there would be no going back. And as someone appeared to guide me further inside, I realized that for the first time since stepping into that car, I was more afraid of what waited outside than the man who had brought me here. And just before I turned away, I heard him speak again, quieter this time, almost to himself, "Make sure no one follows her path," and I did not know what that meant yet, but I knew one thing for certain: my life before tonight was already gone. The room they led me into was too quiet, too perfect, like nothing inside it had ever been touched by real life. Soft lighting traced along the walls, a bed already prepared as if someone had known I would be here before I did, and I stood there for a moment without moving, my son still in my arms, his small fingers curled into my sleeve like he understood we were somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere we did not belong. "You can rest here," the woman said gently, her voice the first one that did not carry weight or command, just calm, measured reassurance. She looked at me like I was not a threat, not a mistake, just someone who had ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and for a second I almost believed it, almost let myself relax. But then I remembered the gates, the silence, the way everyone moved around him, and that feeling returned, sharp and grounding. This was not safety, this was controlled safety. There was a difference. "Thank you," I said quietly, adjusting my son as I stepped further inside, the door closing softly behind me with a click that sounded too final for comfort. I lowered him onto the bed, brushing damp hair from his forehead, his skin warm under my fingers, warmer than it should have been. My chest tightened instantly. "Hey," I whispered, kneeling beside him, "stay with me." His eyes fluttered, not fully opening, and I felt that familiar wave of fear rise. The kind that had nothing to do with men in suits or locked gates, but everything to do with being a mother who could not afford to lose control. I looked around quickly, searching for something, anything, and the woman seemed to understand without me asking. "I will bring water," she said, already turning toward the door, but before she could leave, it opened again, and he stepped inside without knocking, without hesitation, like every space in this house belonged to him, which it probably did. His presence filled the room immediately, not louder, not harsher, just undeniable. His eyes moved from me to the bed, to my son, and something shifted again, subtle but there. "He is not well," he said, not a question. I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "He has had a fever since this afternoon. I was trying to get him home." The words felt smaller now, less important in a place like this, but he did not dismiss them, did not ignore them. Instead he stepped closer, just enough to look down at the child without invading the space entirely, and for a moment the room felt different, less sharp, less controlled, like something human had slipped through the cracks. "There is a doctor on call," he said, already turning slightly toward the woman. "Have him come now." The command was quiet but immediate, and she nodded without hesitation before leaving, the door closing again, leaving just the two of us in that space that suddenly felt too still. I stood slowly, my arms wrapping around myself without thinking. "You do not have to do that," I said, unsure why I said it, maybe because accepting help from someone like him felt like crossing a line I could not see yet. He looked at me then, really looked this time, not calculating, not measuring, just observing. "I do not do things I do not have to," he replied, and something in the way he said it made my breath catch, not because it was cold, but because it was true. Completely and unapologetically true. I held his gaze for a second longer than I should have, then looked away, focusing on my son again, because that was something I understood, something real. Minutes passed in silence, the kind that stretched but did not break, until I finally spoke again, softer this time. "Why are you helping me?" The question felt dangerous, like it might change something if I asked it out loud, but I needed to know. He did not answer immediately. His eyes moved toward the window, toward the darkness beyond it, then back to me, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, almost distant. "Because tonight," he said slowly, "you stepped into something that should not have touched you." The words settled into the room like a truth I could not argue with. And before I could respond, before I could ask anything else, he turned toward the door, his hand resting briefly on the handle. "Rest," he added, without looking back. "Tomorrow, you decide what you believe, and then he was gone, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers, and a feeling I could not ignore, that whatever this was, it was only beginning. The doctor arrived faster than I expected, like time moved differently inside those walls, like everything here bent around a single decision. He did not ask questions the way normal people did not hesitate at the door or look surprised to find me there. He simply stepped in, calm and focused, carrying a small case that looked too precise to belong anywhere outside this world. "May I?" he said quietly, already approaching the bed. And I nodded, stepping back just enough to give him space. But not enough to let go, never enough for that. My eyes stayed on my son the entire time as the doctor checked his temperature, his breathing, every small detail that suddenly felt like it mattered more than anything else. "It is a mild fever," he said after a moment, his voice steady, reassuring in a way I had not realized I needed. "Nothing dangerous, but he needs rest and fluids." I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding, my shoulders dropping slightly as the tension eased just enough to keep me from breaking. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice softer now, more human, because this part of my world, this part one understood, and for a moment everything else faded, the gates, the silence, him, it all blurred into the background. The doctor prepared something simple, nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, just careful, controlled care, and when he finished, he gave me a small nod. "He will be fine by morning," he said, then hesitated, just slightly, like he was choosing his next words carefully. "You should rest as well." I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny but because it felt impossible. Rest did not exist in a place like this, not really, not when every answer came with more questions, but I nodded anyway, because it was easier than explaining everything I did not understand. The doctor left as quietly as he had come, the door closing behind him with that same soft finality, and once again I was alone, except I was not really alone, because even in the silence I could feel it, the presence of something larger than the room, something watching, something waiting. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing my fingers gently through my son's hair, counting each breath, grounding myself in something real, something that made sense. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time felt different here, stretched in ways I could not measure, and just when I started to believe the night might settle into something quieter, I heard it, a soft sound outside the door, not loud, not alarming, just enough to remind me that this place never truly slept. I stood slowly, careful not to wake my son, and moved toward the door, hesitating for a second before opening it, just a fraction, enough to see the hallway, empty, still, but not silent. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, voices too low to understand, and then I saw him again, at the far end of the corridor. Standing with someone else, his posture unchanged, controlled, but there was something different now, something sharper in the way he listened, the way the other man spoke quickly, urgently. Even from this distance I could feel the shift. Whatever was happening, it had not stopped, it had not gone away, it had followed me here, and before I could close the door, before I could step back into the illusion of safety, his head turned slightly, just enough for his eyes to find me across the distance, like he had known I was there all along, like nothing in this house moved without him noticing. And for a second we just looked at each other, no words, no explanations, just that same unspoken understanding settling between us. Then he said something to the man beside him, something I could not hear, and started walking in my direction, slow, deliberate, and I felt my pulse quicken again, not from fear this time, but from something more complicated, something I could not name yet. I stepped back into the room, closing the door softly, but I knew he was coming. I knew this night was not over. And a part of me realized something I had not wanted to admit, that whatever answers I was waiting for, they were about to change everything again. The knock came. Softer than I expected, just a quiet sound against the door, but it still made my chest tighten, like everything inside me was bracing for something I could not predict. I did not move right away, I just stood there, watching the handle, listening to the silence that followed. Then his voice came through, low, controlled, unmistakable. "Open the door," he said, not loud, not demanding, but absolute in a way that made ignoring it feel impossible. I glanced back at my son, still asleep, his breathing steadier now, and that was enough to push me forward. I crossed the room and opened the door slowly, just enough to see him standing there, closer now than before, the hallway light framing him in a way that made everything else fade. He did not step in immediately, did not speak right away. his eyes moved past me toward the bed, confirming what he already knew, then back to me. He is stable, he said. Like a conclusion he had already reached before asking, I nodded, my hand still resting on the door, unsure whether to let him in or keep him out, but that hesitation did not last long, because he stepped forward anyway, closing the distance with quiet certainty, and somehow the room felt smaller with him inside it, more contained, more aware. He stopped a few feet away, not too close, not too far, just enough to hold control without forcing it. You should sleep, he said, his tone the same as before, steady, measured, like rest was something that could be commanded into existence. I shook my head slightly, a reflex more than a decision. I cannot, I admitted, my voice low, not here. He studied me for a moment, not dismissing the answer, not challenging it, just taking it in like it mattered. Then he glanced toward the window, toward the darkness beyond the glass. They are still looking, he said, and the words settled heavier than anything else he had said so far. I felt my stomach drop again. That same cold realization returning. You keep saying that, I replied quietly, forcing myself to hold his gaze, but you have not told me why. This time he did not look away, did not deflect. His expression remained unreadable, but there was something deeper beneath it now, something that felt closer to truth than before. Because you crossed a line you did not see, he said slowly, and now you are visible to people who do not forget. The explanation was not enough, not really, but it was more than I had before, and it was enough to make my thoughts spiral into places I did not want them to go. I wrapped my arms around myself again, grounding, steadying. Then tell me what to do, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. Because that was the truth of it. I did not know what to do anymore. I did not know how to get back to the life I had before this night started. He went still for a second, like the question had shifted something, then he stepped slightly closer, not enough to invade, but enough to make his presence impossible to ignore. For now, he said, his voice quieter than before, almost calm in a way that felt dangerous, you stay where I can see you. I exhaled slowly, the answer both reassuring and unsettling at the same time. And tomorrow? I asked, needing something beyond this moment, something that looked like a way out. He held my gaze for a second longer, then turned his head slightly toward the door, like the rest of the world was already pulling him back. Tomorrow, he said, you decide if you trust me or not. The words hung there between us, heavier than they should have been, because trust was not something I gave easily, not anymore, and yet here I was, in his house, under his protection, with no clear way out. He stepped back then, moving toward the door, but before he left, he paused, his hand resting briefly against the frame, and for the first time since I had met him, there was something almost human in his voice, something quieter, less controlled. Either way, he added, without looking at me, they will not stop looking. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone again with the weight of a choice I was not ready to make, and the growing realization that whatever happened next would not be something I could undo. Sleep did not come, not the kind that lets your mind rest, not the kind that makes you forget where you are. It came in fragments, broken by every small sound, every shift of light beyond the curtains, and each time I opened my eyes I needed a second to remember this was real, that the quiet around me was not peace but something else, something controlled. My son stirred sometime before dawn, his small hand reaching for mine before his eyes even opened, and that simple movement pulled me back into something steady, something I could hold on to. Mom, he whispered, his voice soft, confused, and I leaned closer immediately, brushing his hair back. I am here, I said gently, forcing calm into every word. You are safe. I did not know if that was true, but I needed him to believe it. His eyes blinked slowly, adjusting, taking in the unfamiliar room, the silence, the stillness. Where are we? He asked, and I hesitated just long enough to feel it, that moment where truth and protection did not line up. Somewhere quiet. I answered instead, because it was not a lie. Not entirely. He nodded slightly, accepting it in the way children do when they trust the person saying it more than the words themselves. His breathing steadied again, his body relaxing into the bed, and I stayed beside him, not moving, not looking away, because that was the only thing that felt real. Time passed slowly, the kind that stretches without breaking, until the first light of morning began to push through the curtains, soft and gray, and for a moment the world outside felt distant, almost normal, until I heard it, a quiet knock, different from the one before, lighter, less certain. I stood carefully, making sure he stayed asleep, and crossed the room, opening the door just enough to see the same woman from before, her expression calm but observant. "He asked me to check on you," she said softly, and I knew immediately who she meant without her saying his name. I nodded once, stepping back to let her in. She moved quietly, her presence gentle in a way that did not belong to this house. Her eyes flicked toward the bed, taking in the small details, the signs of rest, the signs of recovery. "The fever is down," she said after a moment, more to reassure me than to inform, and I felt that small shift inside again, that fragile sense of relief that made everything else seem further away. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than before. She gave a small nod, then hesitated, like there was something else she wanted to say but was choosing not to. Instead she turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to glance back at me. "He is waiting," she added quietly, and those 3 words settled into the room heavier than anything else, because waiting meant a decision had to be made. Waiting meant this moment would not last. I looked back at my son, still asleep, peaceful in a way that felt borrowed, and then toward the door, toward the world I did not understand. I stepped out into the hallway, closing the door gently behind me, and the silence returned immediately, the same controlled stillness from the night before, but it felt different now, sharper, more defined, like daylight had revealed something I had not seen before. He stood at the far end again, exactly where I expected him to be, as if he had not moved since the night ended, his posture unchanged, his presence just as steady. And when I started walking toward him, I realized something I had not fully accepted until now, that this was not about being trapped, it was about choosing where to stand. And as I reached him, he looked at me with that same unreadable expression and said, "Now you understand the difference," and I knew he was not talking about the house, or the night, or even the danger outside. He was talking about me, and the fact that I had already started to change. He did not move when I stopped in front of him, did not rush to fill the silence, and somehow that made everything feel more deliberate, like this moment had been waiting for me to arrive before it could begin. "What difference?" I asked quietly, my voice steady but not as certain as I wanted it to be. He studied me for a second, not with suspicion but with something closer to recognition, like he had seen this shift happen before, just not with me. "The difference between being brought here," he said slowly, "and choosing to stay." The word settled deeper than I expected, because I felt it, that truth I had been trying not to name. I glanced back down the hallway for just a second, toward the room where my son was sleeping, safe for now, then back at him. "You said I could leave," I replied, holding on to that one thing that still felt like control. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly. "You can," he said, "the door is not locked." It sounded simple when he said it, almost reasonable, but nothing about this was simple. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the weight building in my chest. "And if I walk out," I continued, "what happens then?" He did not answer immediately. His gaze shifted past me, towards something unseen, like he was measuring the distance between this house and whatever waited beyond it. Then he looked back at me, and this time there was no hesitation. "Then you return to a world that has already changed around you," he said, "and you will not see it until it is too late." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard more than anything else, not because it was comforting, but because it did not try to be. It was simply the truth as he understood it, and for the first time I realized he was not trying to convince me. He was giving me a choice he believed I would make correctly. I wrapped my arms around myself again, not from fear but from the pressure of deciding something that did not have a clear answer. "You keep saying they are looking for me," I said, softer now, "but you still have not told me who they are." His jaw tightened just slightly, the first visible sign of restraint I had seen. "People who do not like loose ends," he replied. And that was all he offered. No names, no details, just enough to confirm that whatever this was, it was bigger than me, bigger than anything I had stepped into before. Silence stretched between us again, but it felt different now, not empty, not uncertain, just waiting. I looked down briefly, then back up at him, meeting his gaze fully this time. "And you?" I asked, "What do you get from this?" The question lingered in the space between us, heavier than the others, because it forced something personal into something that had felt controlled, calculated. He held my gaze without looking away, and for a moment I thought he might not answer at all. Then he spoke, his voice quieter than before, almost reflective. "Control," he said simply, over a situation that should not have reached you. I let that settle, the honesty, the clarity, the way he did not pretend it was anything else, and strangely, that made it easier to understand, easier to stand there without stepping back. And if I stay? I asked, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. He took a small step closer, not enough to overwhelm, but enough to make the answer feel immediate, real. Then you stay under my protection, he said, the same words as before, but different now, heavier, more defined, not a statement of control, but a line drawn between what was safe and what was not. I nodded slowly, not fully agreeing, not fully resisting, just acknowledging the weight of it, the reality of it, and for the first time since this all started, I did not feel like I was reacting, I felt like I was deciding, and as that realization settled in, he stepped back slightly, giving me space without turning away. Take your time, he said, his voice steady again, controlled, but not too much. I understood what he meant without asking. Time was not something I had anymore, not in the way I used to. I glanced once more down the hallway, toward my son, then back at him, and in that moment I realized something that changed everything, that this was not about whether I trusted him, it was about whether I trusted the world outside less, and that was a question I was not ready to answer, not yet. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling the weight of his words settle into something that was no longer abstract, no longer distant, it was real now, immediate, pressing against every instinct I had. I turned away first, not because I had an answer, but because I needed space to think, to breathe, to remember who I was before this night rewrote everything. The hallway felt different as I walked back, quieter but not empty, like it was watching me the same way he did, measuring every step, every hesitation. When I reached the door, my hand paused on the handle, just for a second, because I knew that once I stepped back inside, I would not be the same person who had walked out. I opened it slowly, the room unchanged, my son still asleep, his small body curled into the blanket like nothing outside mattered, like the world had not shifted beneath us. I moved to his side and sat down, brushing my fingers lightly across his forehead, cooler now, steady, and that simple change grounded me more than anything else. This was what mattered, not the house, not the man, not the danger I could not see, just him, just keeping him safe. I let out a slow breath, my thoughts finally settling into something clearer, not easy, not comfortable, but clear. I looked toward the window, toward the light that had fully replaced the night, and for the first time I realized that leaving did not mean going back, it meant stepping into something unknown without protection, without control, and staying meant accepting his world, his rules, his presence in a way that would change everything just as much. There was no safe choice, only the one that gave me a chance. I stood slowly, my decision forming. Not in words but in the quiet certainty that followed. I adjusted the blanket around my son, making sure he was comfortable, making sure he would not wake too soon. Then I stepped back, taking one last look at him before turning toward the door again, this time without hesitation. The hallway felt shorter now, like the distance between who I was and who I was becoming had already closed. He was still there, exactly where I left him, as if he had known I would come back, as if this had already been decided. I stopped in front of him, holding his gaze without looking away. I stay, I said, the words steady, stronger than I expected, because they were not just a response, they were a choice. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, something quieter, almost approving, but not in a way that felt like victory, more like confirmation, like a piece of something had fallen into place. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. Then you follow my rules, he said, not harsh, not demanding, just clear. I did not argue, did not question it, because I understood now that this was the cost of the decision I had made. And my son? I asked, my voice firm again, grounded in the one thing I would not compromise. His answer came without hesitation. He stays safe, he said, and for the first time since this began, I believed him, not completely, not without doubt, but enough to take the next step, enough to stand there without stepping back. Silence settled between us again, but it felt different now, not uncertain, not waiting, just still. And as he turned slightly, signaling for me to follow, I realized something that should have frightened me more than it did, that I was not being led anymore, I was choosing to walk beside him. And as I took that first step, I understood the truth I had been avoiding since the moment I opened that car door, that this was never about the wrong taxi, it was about the moment everything changed, and the man who had said I was under his protection was not just offering safety, he was becoming part of my story whether I was ready or not.